We had a countdown, so oh, we're live.
Oh, we're live? All right. Welcome on in. WIP Daily. Excited to be here with you and appreciate everyone who listens, subscribes, and follows the podcast. We're live on YouTube today. I think it's our first time going live on WIP Daily. So appreciate everyone hopping in and watching live, and we're going back and watching later. Tucker's going to join me in a few minutes as we get to the thing I do every year around this time. It started off as a column on the WIP website and it moved to the podcast here. X bold predictions for the 20 whatever Eagles and do one extra per year. So now 24 bold predictions for the 2024 Eagles. I have them right here in front of me. I've got it. This is my note on my phone. 24 bold predictions. I'll roll through them. We'll kind of go through the season as we go through them. And Tucker will join me intermittently through this as we discuss how we think this Eagles season is going to go. All right, I'm going to start off here with one that you're not going to like, but I think it's the way it's going to go, and it's going to kind of set the stage for a roller coaster of a season for this season Eagles team. I have the Eagles stumbling to a 1-2 start through the first 3 weeks. I think the beginning of this schedule is way more challenging than some people do. The Packers are a tough game in Brazil. That Falcons game is not super easy here, though I think the Eagles are likely to win that game because they're at home. And then they have a short week road game. I don't think much of the Saints, but that's a short week road game in a dome with a new center and a new offense and new blitz protection and pickup, all that. 1-2 start for the Eagles before they get going. Jalen Hurts this season is going to reach 25 passing touchdowns for the first time in his career. He's going to go back to less than 10 interceptions, 25 passing touchdowns, less than 10 interceptions this year for Jalen Hurts. And he's going to push that passer rating back up to the mid-90s. It's a bounce-back passing season for Jalen Hurts in his first year under Kellen Moore. Statistically, he's going to be way better than he was last year. The other side of it, though, my third bold prediction is Jalen Hurts going to have his least productive season on the ground as a runner. You know, if you look at Jalen Hurts' numbers year by year as a runner, it's going down, yards per carry every year. And some of that could be attributed to they do more tush pushes. So it's like, all right, those are 1 yard carries. Some of it is just maybe, where they are on the field and what he needs to get. But some of it, those just use your eyes. He doesn't run, or hasn't, at least didn't last year, like he did in the past. And part of me now wonders if Jalen Hurts, with over 1,100 carries between Alabama and Oklahoma and the Eagles, just doesn't have that burst anymore. People say he looks fast this offseason. We'll see. I think he takes a step back as a runner, step forward as a thrower, step back as a runner, and he doesn't run as prolifically as he has in the past. Number 4 for bold predictions this season, I think Kenny Pickett's going to start multiple games this year. Jalen Hurts has been able to stay on the field, or at least they did last year. His first 2 years, though, as a starter, he missed time. And I think all the idea that it doesn't matter who the backup is. No, it does. Eagles history says it does. Jalen Hurts' history says it does. I think Pickett's going to start multiple games this season. And I wouldn't be surprised. I think one of them's going to be, later in the year. Maybe it'll be against Justin Fields and the Steelers in a what-if game. Kenny Pickett starts multiple games for the Eagles this season. And my next bold prediction here is the defense. Look, they're going to start off slow. I think the expectations for this defense need to be, kind of reeled in a little bit here. They're very young, one of the youngest defense in the league. And I think Vic Fangio's system will eventually hit and it'll work and they'll be much better than last year. But it's going to take time. I mean, this opening game is a challenge. The Falcons game is a challenge. I think this thing starts moving forward by the end of September and early in October. And I wouldn't be surprised by the end of the season if we actually have a favorable outlook on the future of the Eagles defense. We say, wow, Jalen Carter and Jordan Davis and Nolan Smith and Nakobe Dean and Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean. They've got a lot of pieces here. Isaiah Rodgers for the future. But for right now, I think we have to have, kind of limited expectations. And speaking of Quinyon Mitchell, and then we'll get Tucker's thoughts on the first slew of predictions here. Quinyon Mitchell, 16-1. He's my pick. Defensive Rookie of the Year. Vic Fangio doesn't say nice things about anybody. It just feels like he's very subdued in his praise. But he was very high in his praise of Quinyon Mitchell from the offseason program to minicamp to training camp to even the other day, saying he's going to play and he's going to play a lot. That tells me something. He obviously thinks he has something special in Quinyon Mitchell. I think he's going to win the award in a slight, quick, a vote, small vote in terms of the percentage of votes over Leatu Latu from the Colts. So Quinyon Mitchell, the defensive rookie there. So the first group of predictions here. Eagles stumble to a 1-2 start. Number 2, Jalen Hurts reaches 25 touchdown passes for the first time as a starter. Jalen Hurts has his least productive running season. Number 4, Kenny Pickett starts multiple games this year. Number 5, the defense starts off extremely slow and then picks it up by the end of the year. And number 6, Quinyon Mitchell wins the Defensive Rookie of the Year. Tucker, what's your take on these takes?
Yeah, I mean, I think Jalen Hurts not being as effective as a runner, it's kind of trending that way. And it almost reminds me a little bit of Donovan McNabb in his career arc. Now, Jalen Hurts, I think, was more polished as a passer earlier in his career compared to Donovan, but Donovan ran, I think, for almost 700 yards his first full year as a starter and got some MVP votes. And then you kind of fast forward to 2004 when he was probably at his peak, only ran for about 200 yards, really didn't use that as a weapon anymore. And if Jalen Hurts can continue to improve as a passer and improve as a passer from the pocket, which is something Kellen Moore has said they're really trying to focus on this offseason and getting him to stick around in the pocket maybe a split second longer, I think him running or maybe just scrambling in general, right? I think maybe the design runs will still be there, but if he can stay in the pocket longer and give AJ Brown and Devontae Smith and now Jahan Dotson, as well as Scottard a chance to get open, or just take it down to Saquon Barkley, might just be hanging out in the flat and let him pick up, maybe the tough yards to make it, 3rd and 2 and 3rd and 3, as opposed to him rolling out, and trying to make something happen with his legs. I think that all kind of plays into it. And you mentioned the defense starting slow. I just think they're sort of a younger unit. They're a unit that's in the midst of a transition, and if someone like Quinyon Mitchell can step in and be a playmaker, which is something they've missed, I think the last couple of years. Like Darius Slay was that. He hasn't been for a little while now. If Quinyon Mitchell can come in and be a guy who can take the ball away and make big plays and make game-changing plays, that would be huge for a team that I just think sorely lacks, big time playmakers right now.
Yeah, well, speaking of playmakers, Darius Slay, when he was traded here, he was billed as big play Slay, and he's had a good Eagles career and helped the Eagles get to the Super Bowl a couple years ago. But with the youth movement on defense, it's almost this awkward thing where Slay's still here. He's still good enough to start. They're going to start him. But I think the cliff is coming. 7th bold prediction for this season. Darius Slay is going to hit the James Bradbury cliff that he hit last year. Look at his age. The corners do not typically play well at this age. Now, the good news is the Eagles have the young depth this year they didn't have last year to get Slay off the field if he stinks. I think Slay's going to hit a wall. And I think by the end of the season, he's not going to be a starter on this football team anymore. Quinyon Mitchell will be. Isaiah Rodgers will be. Maybe Cooper DeJean will be, depending on if they move him outside or keep him in the slot. But I think Slay's about to hit a wall. That's the 7th bold prediction. Number 8, this is the lock of the season. So I said the Eagles are going to start off 1-2. They will rebound with a win over the Bucs to avenge the playoff loss last year to go to 2-2. Then they have a bye week after the 4th game. The lock of the season is the Eagles are going to beat the Browns in the 5th game, their 6th week of the season. That is Cleveland's 3rd straight road game. It is as bad of a spot for a team as you'll find in the NFL this year. Cleveland on a 3rd straight road game. The Eagles off a bye. The Eagles are 2-2, kind of teetering here. They're going to blow the doors off the Browns, win that game by 3 scores, and get themselves going for the rest of the season. Number 9, and this one, I kind of, when I was going through it, I was like, do I really think this could happen? I do. So Dan Graziano, ESPN, last week put out a list. He talked to each team. He went to each camp. Like, what are they saying at the camp? And one from the Eagles was, don't be surprised if Devontae Smith has the biggest year at wide receiver. And I'm going to use that as my bold prediction year for Devontae. Devontae's going to outproduce A.J. Brown this year. I think the new offense with Kellen Moore is going to give the Eagles liberty to put Devontae in the slot more. And I think he's going to be a matchup nightmare there because he's too shifty for any kind of corner, and he's obviously too fast for a bigger nickel. I just think he's going to be more productive this year, snap by snap, than A.J. Brown. This is the year he overtakes him in catches. Yards, we'll see, because A.J. could come up with big plays, but this is the year the number 1 receiver on this he returns with catches is Devontae Smith. Number 10, Saquon Barkley, year 1 stats with the Eagles. There's a lot of predictions out there on offensive player of the year and maybe MVP votes. I'm not going that far. Here's where I have Saquon, year number 1 with the Eagles. I think it's going to be a good year. I think he will produce, and we won't sit back and say he wasn't worth the money, but it won't be MVP or offensive, player of the year kind of level. 1,070 rushing yards, 8 touchdowns on the ground, 41 receptions, 2 receiving touchdowns. So 10 total touchdowns, probably in the range of 1,500 yards total from scrimmage for Saquon Barkley this year for the Philadelphia Eagles. Number 11, Howie Roseman trades for a veteran pass rusher at the trade deadline. The Eagles are going to be a team that's obviously in it in the NFC East, but not probably pushing for a number 1 seed around the trade deadline. But Howie's going to go for it and try to help this team with a veteran on the defensive side. 2 names to watch out for at the trade deadline with Howie Roseman. Cam Jordan, the pass rusher from the Saints, who I believe his contract is up after this season. He's been around forever, over 100 career sacks. The Saints are probably a dead team going nowhere. He could probably be had. And the other one is Khalil Mack, who could team up again with Vic Fangio. Mack, one of the better pass rushers of this generation, had a big year last year. I'm not buying the Chargers hype, even with Harbaugh there this year. I think the Chargers could sell and sell more at the trade deadline. Khalil Mack could be a Philadelphia Eagle at the deadline. And number 12, Dallas Goedert plays his final season as an Eagle. I'm still surprised the Eagles didn't draft a tight end this year. You look at Goddard's numbers, and it's just been a downward slide the last couple of years. He hasn't been able to stay healthy. Their weapons now are more concentrated at wide receiver and running back. And I think Goddard's production dips again. If he gets hurt again, that adds to it. And I think next year we go into the draft, and the idea is tackle, edge rusher, and tight end. So 7 through 12 here. Darius Slay falls off the cliff. Eagles over the Browns, lock of the year. Devontae Smith has a big year than A.J. Brown. Saquon Barkley, over 1,000 yards rushing, 40 catches. Howie Roseman trades for a pass rush at the deadline. And Dallas Goedert Tucker his last year as a Philadelphia Eagle. What's your take on those takes?
Yeah, I think when you look at the offensive weapons on this team, there is sort of a line of demarcation, and I don't know how much longer you can keep Dallas Goedert when one, he doesn't stay healthy, right? He's never played 16 or now 17 games in a full season. He's missed time each of the last couple years, and look at his numbers; they've fallen every year since 2021, right? Since his big come out year, his first full year as a starter, if they traded Ertz midseason in 2020, he had 800 yards, then he had 700 yards. Last year, he had 600 yards. And it's not like there are going to be more targets to go around now that Saquon Barkley is here. So as the guy hits, I think his age 29 season, he's going to be entering age 30. The Eagles don't exactly have an heir apparent at tight end, which is interesting because they've done that previously with Ertz. They drafted Goddard, and with Brent Selleck, they drafted Zach Ertz. So it's kind of a new spot for them to be in for the first time in well over a decade. But you also add in Saquon Barkley, who I wasn't high on when he was with the Giants. I thought signing him wasn't maybe the best use of resources. He just doesn't impress me as much as he did as when he was a rookie before the injuries started to pile up. He doesn't really break tackles anymore. And I think if you were to kind of look, and I think your prediction is probably right about spot on. And I think most people, if you ask, how many yards does he get, they'll probably say between 1,000 and 1,100. I think if you had to really go to the extreme and say, well, do you think he's going to get 1,500 or do you think he's going to get under 1,000? I would lean towards under 1,000. Like, this is a guy who I think really hasn't been that great the last couple of years. He's underwhelmed his last couple of years with the Giants. That's why they're willing to basically let him walk for the money they did. And I just maybe it's a Christian McCaffrey kind of thing. After he was misutilized and injured all the time in Carolina, he went to San Francisco and became an MVP candidate. But I need to see it with Saquon Barkley, and after an offseason where a lot of people, especially at training camp, Elliott Shore Parks and Brandon Lee Gouton on the Go Birds podcast talked about, he didn't really flash a whole lot in training camp, didn't have a lot of big runs, and that's hard to do, I think, as a running back when you're not playing tackle football to really flash and impress people. But I don't know, I have a weird feeling that, like, week 5 or week 6, we're gonna be talking about Saquon Barkley like, "Hey, was this a good use of that money?" Because he might not be the guy we thought we were getting.
Well, with all the youth they have on defense too, and maybe the lack of impact at the edge rusher, if he doesn't produce at a high level, we're going to come back to that contract. Like, was that worth the money? All right, that leads me to number 13. Although maybe Saquon won't be an offensive player of the year, doesn't mean the run game as a whole won't be good. This line should block well for it. Number 13, Will Shipley. I'm impressed by him. I was impressed all camp. He's going to unseat Kenny Gainwell as the number 2 back before season's end, including a 100-yard game in December, which is going to help the Eagles win a game. And if you're opportunistic in fantasy, it could help you win a championship. Will Shipley has a 100-yard game this year and becomes the new number 2 back on this team. Number 14, the Commanders, not the Cowboys. I've been on this for a while. Entered December as the biggest threat to take the division from the Eagles. Look at their schedule. Young quarterbacks like Jaden Daniels tend to pop quickly. It's a professional coaching staff now with Dan Quinn and Cliff Kingsbury, and they added a lot. I think people are underselling how much the Commanders added in terms of veteran players that will raise the floor of that team. I think they're going to be pretty good and one of the surprises of the NFL. Number 15, Milton Williams is the next young Eagle to earn a contract extension. I mentioned earlier that Vic Fangio doesn't praise many players. He's more subdued in that. He did praise Milton Williams a few weeks ago, and he said he tried to get Miami to trade for him last year and Howie didn't want to do it. It feels like Milton Williams is the next guy. And he's the one guy on that defensive line we don't talk about. We talk about Carter and Davis because they're the first round picks. They're the Georgia kids. Milton Williams gets a contract extension midseason to stay with the Philadelphia Eagles. Number 16, the Mekhi Becton experiment won't work. It didn't work with the Jets. I'm shocked the Eagles are going into this season with him at right guard. I don't see it. The Jets were desperate for offensive linemen, and they let him go. It tells you something. And I'm not sold on Tyler Steen either. By season's end, Trevor Keegan, excuse me, the guard from Michigan, fifth-round pick, he's going to be the starter at right guard. That could be a revolving door all season long. And number 17, the Eagles stumble to 6-6 entering December. And much like 2019, they basically have to win out or almost win out to win the division. And they're going to do it by going 10-7. They're going to go 4-1 in December with wins over the Panthers, the Steelers, the Cowboys, and the Giants. Tucker, to save the season at 10-7. But I could see them entering December at 6-6. That schedule in November between the Cowboys, between the Rams, between the Ravens, that's challenging there.
Yeah, and you have the Commanders in between all of that too. You're
My Commanders?
yeah, your Commanders. You're your top contender for the NFC East, and then you look at December, like, you end with Washington, Dallas, New York, and I don't think the Giants have anything special, but, ending with 3 straight division games, I think is tough in and of itself, and it'll be an interesting spot for this team because even though I guess go back to 2021, they struggled to start the year, then they kinda righted the ship against the Lions and, went on a stretch of great football for about 2 years after that, but this has been a team that's kind of been a front runner the last couple of years. They got hot. They had the best record in football the last 2 years through about 12 or 13 weeks. They were the last undefeated team in football the last couple of years. It would be interesting to see how this version of Jalen Hurts or this version of Nick Sirianni, they aren't necessarily stumbling. They seem to have an idea of what they're doing. They're, entrenched in their role at the moment. I would be curious as to how they react or how this team reacts after last year, debacle to end the season. How would they react to adversity to start the season? Would they kind of fold and give up the way they sort of did down the stretch last year, or would they figure things out? And maybe the new coordinators, maybe having Vic Fangio, on the defensive side of the ball would help right the ship a little bit. But that would be something that we really haven't seen this team do is fall and then get back up. I haven't seen them do since 2021.
No, we haven't. All right, let's finish it off with the real bold ones here to finish the season and how this thing progresses after 2024. NFC East order of finish. Eagles win the division at 10-7. The Commanders at 10-7 as well, finish in second place. The Cowboys in third with 8 wins, and then the Giants come in last with 5 victories. The 7 NFC playoff teams this year in seed order. Number 1, the Detroit Lions. Number 2, the Atlanta Falcons. Number 3, the San Francisco 49ers. Number 4, the Philadelphia Eagles. Number 5, the Green Bay Packers. The 6th seed, yeah, those Commanders. And the 7th seed, maybe even a bigger surprise, Jonathan Gannon's Arizona Cardinals make the playoffs as the 7th seed. The starting linebackers in the Eagles playoff game at home, second week of January against the Packers, are Nakobe Dean and Jeremiah Trotter Jr. The youth movement is complete. And despite a 4th consecutive playoff berth for the Eagles are going to move on from Nick Sirianni when the playoffs, and the Eagles lose in the first round in the wild card round. If this season reminds me a lot of 2019, stumbling, questions, they rally to make the playoffs. But in 2019, remember after that season, the Eagles, there was a lot of weirdness about wanting to have more control over Doug's staff, and Doug Peterson pushed back, and it kind of led to an awkward 2020 where they kept Doug, and then it was a disaster. I think if the Eagles don't make a big run, don't have a top seed or go far in the playoffs, they're going to move on from Sirianni, and they're going to try to improve this thing instead of having another 2020 all over again. So Sirianni takes them to the playoffs. They go 10-7, but if they lose early, which they do in my bold prediction here, he's out. The favorites to land the job immediately as soon as the playoff loss happens are Eagles offensive coordinator Kellen Moore and former Patriots head coach Bill Belichick. All right, let's get to the last 3 predictions here, and then Tucker's thoughts on all these. Lions offensive coordinator Ben Johnson becomes the hot name to jump into the fray. People here want him because the Lions are the number 1 seed and moving towards the Super Bowl. But the worst kept secret in the NFL is he's taken the Bears job to coach Caleb Williams. So it comes down to Kellen Moore and Bill Belichick. On January 28th, I even have the date, January 28th, 2025, the Eagles introduce Bill Belichick as their next head coach. They keep Kellen Moore on to be the offensive coordinator at the urging of Howie Roseman and Jalen Hurts. And the last one, number 24, the final bowl prediction. The strong finish, the coaching change, the signing of Dre Greenlaw when free agency opens, combined with the young defense, has the Eagles enter next season as one of the favorites to come out of the NFC. The only team above them next year, the defending Super Bowl champion, Detroit Lions. Tucker, I hit you with the biggest ones at the end.
Yeah, I mean, I just kinda wanna fast forward to next January,
I
right?
do too.
If this is just a transition year and all that happens, I don't really care about the next 18 weeks. Like, let's get to January 28th and all that beautiful content. That sounds amazing.
It'd be Bill Belichick coaching the Eagles. It would be so 10-7 is the prediction. Eagles make the playoffs, win the division, but I have them out in the wild card round. And Bill Belichick, the next head coach of the Philadelphia Eagles. What's your bold prediction? Leave in the comments below. I appreciate everyone listening, watching, subscribing to WIP Daily. We'll talk soon.